just turn it around. It's all right now. Okay, today is January 3rd, 1978, and this is the second session of an oral history interview with Grandpa J. Seymour Jensen by Steve Cope at the Jensen home. Okay, I've got my notes from last night. We finished, I think, up on all these items. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the place you moved to after your father became marshal and you moved to your grandmother's home. I think that the grandmother's home had been vacant for a while between the time of her death and the time you moved there, or was someone else there, or maybe that's not too important. But you mentioned that the home was on the lower street, and the lower street of town. So, and
that is the old home
the old
father
home.
built.
Uh-huh.
But this one on Main Street was Grandma Jensen's home. I really don't know. Someone may have lived in there, but it's uncertain after her death before we moved there. You see, it was when I was 9 years old, so that would be in 1903. That we moved in there. And the home, do you want to know the type of structure it is?
Tell me a little bit about it. How many rooms?
It's a little cottage of about 4 small rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And
Where was it located in town there?
well, it was a block and a half from the depot. That's about the nearest description I can give on it.
Is it still standing? It's not standing today then?
It's been remodeled, and it's lived in by a widow, Mrs. Brown, of Mount Pleasant. She purchased it of the Johansen family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say Johansen family, that was Uncle Chris, who married Aunt Gertrude. Now, Aunt Gertrude was a sister of Father Jensen. She was the youngest sister. She had one other sister, which she had married John Knudsen, and she died after she had had 2 babies, 2 daughters, Annie and Gertie, or Gertrude. They were Knudsens, John Knudsen's daughters. And so she passed away, and then Uncle John married Emma Christensen Hobro. Now the Hobros were people from the southwest corner of town.
Was there any other? Go ahead.
They had several children. Uncle John had, of course, with this other wife who weren't related to us, but in a way they were like relatives because of the association we had with them.
Of course, the people you live next to, you mentioned yesterday that your father took care of the affairs of the next door neighbor, Uncle Madsen, so he could go on a mission.
Uncle Jim Munson.
And he was actually your mother's brother.
Yes, he was nearest in age to mother. They were the youngest children of the first marriage of Grandpa Munson.
Now, did this new cottage have any particular advantages over the old home that you remember? More conveniences or anything?
No, really, it was smaller and no advantages. It was cozy, and we were comfortable there. It had outhouses, old pig pen that we made a rabbit hutch out of, and we had rabbits until all the neighbors were disgusted, and so we had to move the rabbits.
Did you eat rabbit then?
No, I don't remember of ever eating any
Uh-huh.
rabbit.
Because I know Norma's father has raised them and they eat them.
Yeah.
Norma really likes rabbit.
They are good. If they're prepared well.
But and I ate some, and it tastes a lot like chicken, I thought. But and you just raise them for pets.
Yes, we got to have too many of them.
I guess that happens with rabbits. Okay, this next question. Was Mount Pleasant always the same size as you remember? Do you remember it growing or shrinking?
Mount Pleasant was the largest city in North Sanpete, and at its height it was about 2,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
But as people moved out, it seemed like as the young people grew up, several of them would move out to get greater opportunities in the cities. That's happened everywhere. And that happened with Mount Pleasant, so that we were down to nearly 1,500. At the present time, it has started on the increase because of people moving in from California. And we've had several new families, small families with children move in there.
Do you know what it's up to now?
It's getting back close to the 2,000 mark.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a number of homes vacant, but it seems that real estate is tied up.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not much sale. But some people are managing to find places back there in Mount Pleasant.
Do you remember it as being about 2,000 when you were young, or?
Yes, when I was a small boy, it was around that population.
Was there any industry nearby at all, or was it strictly farming sales?
It was principally farming during all the years that I grew up. And later, of course, as you probably know, the turkey business came into Moroni, and that affected several of our farmers of Mount Pleasant. And so more industry started to come in, and since the California people have come in, they've been buying up the land and establishing dairy plants in various spots in North Sanpete.
When do you remember the turkey business coming in? Or do you have any?
Yes, as I recollect the beginning of the turkey business, it was along toward the latter part of my teaching career. And I would say, roughly speaking, around the 1950.
Uh-huh. Good. What can you put your finger on something that may have been the most remarkable thing about Mount Pleasant's history? The way that I have written this, what was the most remarkable thing about Mount Pleasant's history? You may not think of anything, but that's all right.
Well, in a way, the Depression made quite an imprint, because there were several men in Mount Pleasant who were never on regular income and wages. And during the Depression, they started these national orders like the WPA, and as I say, there were many public buildings built during that period, and in a way that was artificial growth for the city. Like I mentioned, the city hall and the swimming pool and so on.
Uh-huh. What about remarkable traditions? I know that there used to be a parade. I guess it was on the 4th of July.
Yes, it was a tradition to have parades in Mount Pleasant. I don't remember when it really started, but as you say, it was a tradition, and many cases I was involved after coming out of the Army in these parades with the opportunity of leading the parade through the streets.
Or riding in your uniform.
Yes.
Any remarkable traditions then about the Mount Pleasant had, or anything about the town that we haven't talked about that might be interesting or important? Of those chapels, do you remember when they built their church houses that they now have?
In 1934, our Warden Chapel burned down.
Mm-hmm.
The old building that was new in 1908, but the folks had done much to build. It was a high building, and the main chapel part was on the second story, which required going up a long flight of stairs, and for some people that was rather difficult.
Uh-huh.
But we used to take our buggy with Lois in it and get somebody to help me carry it up the steps, and we'd put her in the lobby. There was a little lobby as you came to the top of the stairs before you entered into the church, with a few hangers on for coats, you know. And I distinctly remember how we carried Lois up there and left her right in the buggy so she'd be comfortable and wouldn't make any fuss.
Keep her there in the lobby. Then that was the building that was built in 1908, was it?
That was built in 1908, and I remember how we gathered Sunday eggs as Paul Munson and I, as boys, take to his grandmother, who had charge of the Relief Society storage, and so she took care of the Sunday eggs, and they were converted into money for the help of building of that big church. But the church, when it burned, of course, it burned some records, and it was not possible to redeem it. It wasn't desirable either because of the awkwardness of the thing, having the chapel upstairs that way. Mm-hmm. Classrooms were down in the basement. Mm-hmm. And we, as kids, used to climb in the windows sometimes on primary day, and so. But we were very happy to get the new chapel. It was unusual that it was built during the time of Depression. But in a way, you can see how that favored us, because the many men out of work with spare time on their hands, they donated more labor. Mm-hmm. And much of our share of the building the chapel was through the labor process.
Mm-hmm. Then the church shared, like they do today, the general church headquarters.
They usually furnished about 50% at that time. Mm-hmm. Now, we estimated that the chapel was going to cost us $54,000. Of course, it ran into a little more money than that. But we were fortunate in all cases. Since I was on the building committee, it was left pretty much to me to look after the banking and so on and the funds.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the bishop was supposed to carry on the communications with the general headquarters of the church, and so I suggested to him that I don't act as chairman, but I assist him as a member of the committee. Mm-hmm. And there were 6 of us on the committee. The bishopric, which was A.L. Peterson, and C.L. Stewart, and Joseph Johansson. Mm-hmm. Then there was myself and President Jacobs and John Gunderson. for the other members of the committee.
Mhm.
And those are the names that are on the plaque in the, I believe John K. Madsen was also put on the
Mhm.
building committee.
He's that sheep owner.
Yes, we figured that when we got money in the bank, that his signature on the note was worth all the rest, and they would take it. And I went to the bank and made arrangements for the borrowing of the last $4,000 that built the chapel. And in order to back that up, we got notes to the bank on about 50 of the brethren, that is the families of the war, and but we got 8 men who were more substantial, like John K. Madsen had more money. They signed the note, and that was the main note the bank took to let us have the money. Now, nowadays it's contrary to the church policy to borrow money before a chapel is finished. They won't dedicate it until it's entirely paid for. But with this method, we had those 50 notes outstanding. I took care of those, and as they came and were paid off, we canceled them. And they paid that money in on this big note in the bank. But it wasn't more than a year after the building was dedicated that all of this was cleared out. So every man came through with his promise.
You don't remember anyone that did not come through?
There wasn't anyone that didn't come through.
That's the building that...
That's the building that stands now. And we thought that was
there.
quite a modern building. In fact, it was the first building of its kind, furnished with opera chairs, and one of the first in the church.
I remember those opera chairs,
yeah.
sitting on those. Were those the original chairs I sat on as a little boy? They made them take them out and put pews in.
Yeah, that's right. Because they weren't practical.
Yeah.
And expensive.
They were practical when people would be careful, but then you get people...
Well, after the bolts started coming loose on them, they just couldn't keep up with it, and they'd break down with somebody, and then we had difficulty that way.
So that was built on the same site as the fire that destroyed the original chapel.
It was built on the same spot that the other building was. It extended, the new building extended further on both east and west than the old building had been.
I see. Well, going back to the old building, what you said about primary days, you said that you'd climb through the window. Would that be like a low-level window?
Yeah, the windows were on a level with the ground, actually, because of being a basement there. Mm-hmm. And it was quite an annoyance to the officers and teachers of the primary, because they didn't like people coming in through the windows.
Well, you know, Norma's in the primary now, and one of her big worries is always the irreverence of the kids. And we always chalk that up to modern leniency.
Uh-huh.
But I guess that there's always been a tendency for kids to be kids a little bit, especially on primary day. Do you remember anything else about primary days in connection with that, or anything about primary?
No, I remember some of the teachers who were very fine in the primary, like Annie Jensen Braby, who was a bank teller, and also Andrea Johansson, who died as a young wife, and her. Now, whether this was in the flu days or not, I can't say for sure. It could easily have been right during that period of time. She was a good-natured, fine type of person, and greatly missed by the community. Now, Uncle Jim, on returning from his mission, he became a member of the bishopric of the ward. And that was when the wards were divided. There was only one ward in Mount Pleasant for years and years. And it was during my day that they divided into the North and South Ward. Mm-hmm. And of course that made different bishoprics. And
then they built that other red brick chapel over further north.
The old stone building that was stood from the days of the pioneers until that building was built, that new red brick building in the North Ward. And then finally the town was divided into 4 wards, and we had 2 wards meeting in each building. When I was bishop, there were 1,100 membership in our ward. I always say that I was a war bishop because it was right during the war period, and so many people were moving about, and we had this large number on our ward records, but our percentages of attendance were small. 15% was a high mistake at that time.
15%?
15%. Running?
No, not is. Why do you suppose the church grew so much? The town didn't really grow. Didn't you start out with mostly Mormons there? Was it a matter of activity? That you had to go from 1 ward to 4, or did they make smaller wards, or why did you have to do 4 more?
The custom of the church became so that they rather liked and encouraged smaller wards, and because it meant more activity. You can see every new ward required a new set of officers, and that would increase those who are active. And it's always been the case that when people were active in the church, that the church was in better health. Josh.
Right.
Joyce, what's the matter, honey?
I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned. We were talking about ward size. Let me ask you about that a little bit. The old 1 ward, when Mount Pleasant had only 1 ward, then that must have been a large one. It must have been
yes.
Probably 4 times. You mentioned the 1,100 figure when you were bishop. They must have had over 4,000 in 1 ward then. Is that how they?
Well, you see, if their population was up to 2,000, they were all in that ward, at the exception of some dissenters. The bishop of Bishop Seeley was rather a hard fellow. At least some people thought he was, and we had a bunch of people in the northwest corner of town that apostatized even, or that left the church, and they became rather bitter and critical.
Northwest part of town.
A lot of Swedes, particularly, went in that part of the town and apostatized, and their posterity were rather critical of the church all the way through. And of course that caused some dissension and made a problem for the church.
Mm-hmm. So when you had 1,100, you had about half the town in your ward.
Yes, at that time we did have about.
Yet were there 4 wards at that time?
No, there was just 2 wards when I was bishop. It was later that they separated the wards.
I see.
Now they're thinking of putting them back together again.
They don't hurry.
Or separating them again. They joined the second and third wards to make the second ward.
Uh-huh.
And the old South Ward is now all together again, but it's known as the second ward.
When you were bishop, it was of the South Ward.
When I was bishop, it was the South Ward.
Uh-huh.
When the chapel was built, it was the old South Ward.
Uh-huh. Now, on the north side of town, they never did join those wards, I guess, did they?
They haven't joined them. They've had them separate, and since they've been growing now, they're not likely to join them again. They're talking of separating the other one back into two wards.
Yeah. Well, I imagine so, yeah.
That chapel we built is now known as the Stake Center.
Uh-huh.
You see, and it was built, they began holding conferences there years ago because it was the biggest chapel with the cultural hall added on in the stake, and so it became the Stake Center.
So Stake's conference is held even there now. Even Stake Conference is held there now, even now.
Yes, the stake president's office is there now in the chapel, and the High Council room is upstairs. And they're thinking now of enlarging the building.
I guess the stake covers Spring City and Fairview as well as Mount Pleasant.
Yes, the stake, when I was bishop, about that time, they separated the west side and the east side.
Mm-hmm.
The west side became known as Moroni Stake, and the east side remained as North Sanpete Stake.
So what towns then were included in the east side stake?
The east side was two Fairview wards, two Mount Pleasant wards, a Mountainville ward, and the Spring City ward.
Mountainville, where's that?
Mountainville is otherwise known as the Round Hills.
Uh-huh.
Up northeast of Mount Pleasant.
Uh-huh.
What's this?
I don't know if I've ever been there.
I doubt if you have.
Is there any town there now?
They don't, they did away with that ward. It's now joined with the North Ward of Mount Pleasant. And the people largely moved away from the Mountainville and downtown.
Uh-huh.
Some of them moved to Fairview.
And the Moroni stake, or the
Moroni
west stake, what did it include?
There's Fountain Green, Moroni, and Chester
Uh-huh.
that made up the Moroni stake.
Now, you mentioned that there was an old stone building on the site where the new red brick building is now. What was that used for?
A building on where?
There where the red brick chapel that the North Ward used to meet in.
Oh, there was an old stone chapel that was built there where all the people met under Bishop Seeley, and Grandfather Munson was one of the counselors toward the close of the reign of Bishop Seeley.
Uh-huh.
Then they separated into the south and north wards, and they had two bishoprics at that time.
So you had church meetings in the old stone building then?
Well, we had the north ward of Mount Pleasant in the old stone building until around 1939, around that time.
So that stone building was built about the time you had two wards instead of one in Mount Pleasant?
Well, that stone building was built in the early pioneer days and was used as a meeting for all general meetings of the church around there.
I see. So it was when the wards were split, it was then that they built in they must have split the wards in about 1908, and it was then that they built the wood building that burned in 34.
Yes, to begin with, the South Ward meetings were in the old Simpson schoolhouse. Now, on the northwest corner of the Wasatch campus, there used to be a red brick building known as the Simpson schoolhouse. It was built for that purpose. And that's where we held our, when I first went to Sunday school, it was in the old Simpson